Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We're broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the world and the United Kingdom, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, this is the show where we're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together. And if that's you, please keep watching. And if that's not you, please keep watching anyway, because you might learn something. This is the show where we put the United Kingdom first, because we know we are in a battle for the hearts and minds and souls of the people of this precious nation. So people, if you're watching on YouTube, please smash that thumbs up button. If you're watching on Facebook, please give us a like and a share. If you're watching on Twitter, please give us a repost. And if you give us a quote repost, then we can then send your quote to 28,000 people. A 360 win, as we always say. Now, folks, tell us how you're feeling tonight, what's on your mind, and where you're watching from. Send us your greetings and we will read them out, and we'll give you a shout out. And if you're on TikTok, folks, please also send in your questions, your comments, your points of view. We'll do our best to answer them. We're broadcasting tonight from 7 o'clock right up until 8 p.m. on the nation's premier pro-UK campaigning programme. Well, today has been a busy day politically. There's a lot going on. We had the budget today, and we've also had several days of interesting politics around Rishi Sunak's emergency broadcast on Friday night, when he was so outraged, it appears, horrified indeed, with the election of George Galloway, that he decided to alert the nation to his fears on the matter. So what did you think about that as well? We've certainly got a few comments which we'll get to in the programme as well, related around the idea of expanding, as he seems to be wanting to do, the concept of an extremist, which of course is a very dodgy ground for a democratic government to be treading upon. So we're going to be looking at what might be motivating him to do that, and also the wisdom indeed of trying to extend the definition of such a term within our democratic system. So folks, please tell us what you think about that. Send in your messages on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter and on TikTok. Dan Mack says the English Constitution is the only solution. That almost rhymes. But I guess what's meant by that is the common law tradition that we have, not just in England, of course, but throughout Scotland, which can trace its roots back to the Magna Carta of 1215 and then the later Declaration of Arbroath, whereby it is asserted in both documents essentially that the people are in charge of the politicians and that the politicians are there to serve the people. And what Dan Mack is getting at there is, if we went back to that fundamental point of view and we constructed our society around that, then things would be a lot better. And I have to say, I concur with that, because there's nothing much wrong with the British Constitution, but when politicians start fiddling with these basics, then we can get into trouble. Good stuff. Right, let's read out some comments. Who was first in tonight? Debbie says, good evening, everybody, as does Derek. And hey, I want to thank Derek Hart for sending a super sticker on YouTube, because, folks, we are monetized on YouTube. So please do tell us. Please do send in your super stickers if you would like. Thank you very much, Derek. Thank you indeed. Derek says you're welcome. Hello to Catherine and to David. And to Scotland Scorpion and to British Legends. And to Christopher, who says good evening from Falkirk. Great stuff. Okay, well, we had the budget today, and I won't spend too long upon this, but a couple of things arose from it. One was that the Scottish Secretary of State, Alistair Jack, apparently was the man who advised Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt to cut the national insurance because of the confusion, basically, that the devolved institutions have brought. We don't always know if a tax cut that's announced at Westminster is going to translate over to Scotland or to Wales or to Northern Ireland because of the devolution, certainly to Scotland, of many tax matters. And indeed, if Rishi Sunak had announced an income tax cut, that would not have applied in Scotland, because as you know, in Scotland we are under the control of the SNP and the Greens, and their intention is simply always to put up the taxes. And so if Rishi Sunak had in fact made a tax cut, Humza Yousaf would probably have announced a tax increase. That's the way it unfortunately works now with the devolution of income tax. However, national insurance is not yet devolved, and so a 2p cut in the rate will translate right through to all of the United Kingdom, which I guess is something to be grateful for at the end of the day. But, you know, the whole thing about income tax as well is it's a little bit ridiculous because it's a con at the end of the day. Income tax was a relatively recent tax. Okay, it taxes you for actually working. It taxes your effort, and indeed, in the United States of America, there are several places that are not taxed. Okay, Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming, they don't even have income tax. Okay, they don't even have income tax. So income tax isn't a necessary tax. And if I had my way, I would simply abolish income tax, because it's astonishing that, you know, the more you work, the harder you work, the more successful you are, the more you get taxed. It's a disincentive, basically. And here's the hidden truth that which is to say the people that run the financial system, here's the hidden truth that they don't want you to know. Okay, in a world where sovereign governments, such as ours, can create money out of nothing, there's actually no need for taxes at all. I'm going to say that again. In a world where sovereign governments can create money out of nothing, and indeed do so, there's no need for taxes at all. Taxes themselves are essentially just a form of social control, behavioural control, where you can tax things in order to discourage people from doing certain things. There's a certain logic there, which makes a certain amount of sense. You can tax, if you don't want people to fly on planes, for example, you can tax plane tickets. If you don't want people to drink alcohol, you can heavily tax alcohol. Things like that. Tax is a form of social control. And there might be an argument for that in some cases. But at the end of the day, you don't actually need any tax in a world where sovereign governments can create money out of nothing. Taxes might also be useful if there's too much money in society, finding a way of extracting that money out of society. That's also something that a tax can be used for. But you don't actually need to raise taxes in order to raise money for public works, for example. And people say, no, Alistair, that can't be right. That can't be right. You can't be the only person in the world that says that. But it is right. It is right. And the problem of the national debt only came in after the Bank of England was established in 1694, when a lot of clever guys got together and thought, how can we make money by doing nothing? I know, let's set up a bank and that creates money, and then we get the people to pay it back, and we'll collect the interest. And in various ways, that system gets spread throughout the world and is still with us today. And that's one of the things that in the coming new world, we'll just have to get thrown out with a lot of other nonsense as well, okay? But we actually wrote, I used to do this a lot, like back in between 1999 and 2013, this was my life, campaigning for this sort of thing. No, 2012, 2013, when I then started to concentrate mainly on just doing what I do now, which is arguing for the union. But prior to that, I was one of the world's foremost monetary reformers. And I ran 15 international conferences, 15 annual international conferences on this very subject. So I do know my beans as far as that's concerned. And I decided the other day, I was looking at some of the stuff in our cupboards here in the office, and I thought, I need to start flogging this message again, because I've got a lot of these documents which illustrate all of that. Clarifying Our Money Reform Proposals, a report for the 10th Annual Bromsgrove Conference. This is a 40-page document which talks in much more depth about the sort of things that I've just mentioned there. And then I got together with another group and we produced an actual bill, a draft bill. We called it the Bank of England Creation of Currency Bill, a proposed bill to provide the Bank of England with the exclusive right to create and issue all currency. And I had just completed my Scots law degree, and so I wrote it in the style of an actual bill, and it runs to 60 pages. And I once showed this to a Muslim friend of mine, and I told him that I had done it basically for nothing. And he goes, Alistair, your reward will be in heaven. So, because he said to me, this is something that my organisation would have paid £100,000 for, he said. And I said, well, I did it for nothing. Anyway, we'll put up the link to these two documents, and anybody who's interested, it's pretty technical, although it's actually quite straightforward if you get into it, and if you're interested in it, then it's worth looking at. And maybe one day it will be brought out much clearer. Well, if I have anything to do with it, it certainly will be brought out a lot clearer. Now, so yeah, that was the budget today. I don't think there's anything more to add about that, other than the fact that Jeremy Hunt said that he thought, let's get the Jeremy Hunt quote up here. He said that the NHS was the reason that most of us feel proud to be British, which was probably a little bit of a stretch. There we go. Oh. There it is. Luca Johnston. Yeah, Jeremy Hunt said the NHS is rightly the biggest reason most of us are proud to be British. And Luca Johnston there says it's not even in my top 100 reasons. Well, Luca's actually been on the programme. We need to get Luca back as a guest. I think it's a remarkable creation, and it is a good thing that we've got it. I will reserve judgment on the best way to fund it, however, at the moment. We did, however, give a speech a few years ago where we listed 15 reasons why we can be proud, if we so choose, to be British. And you'll find that link to that article in the thread, 15 Reasons Why We're Proud to Be British. And those were things like we've talked about or touched on, our constitution and parliamentary democracy and things like that. Looking at some comments here on TikTok. Some for the union, some against it. Tell us why you're against the union. Liam McCarthy says it's totally unconservative as well. He's talking about the budget. History Facts says no one likes Rishi, not even conservatives. Liam McCarthy says budget today was absolutely shocking and totally unconservative. Why are they keeping the windfall tax? UK is not a force for good, it is a force for colonialism, says somebody calling themselves History Facts. Well, I've heard that argument before, certainly. Now, where were we? Where were we? Let's look at some of the comments here. Folks, send in, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just bang in some comments, tell us what you think, ask us some questions as well. Happy to answer them. Macaulay says, white, heterosexual, Protestant, family man and a veteran. I work and I love my country, so of course I'm an extremist, according to those who are happy to give our culture and country away. Best wishes from England for God, King and country. British Legend says, Facebook still needs a Northern Ireland flag. Indeed it does. Indeed it does. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff, folks. Let's get your thoughts in. We've got a good number of viewers here. Now, I'm going to talk about Rishi Sunak and his most extraordinary comments on Friday night. And this is maybe going to be a little bit controversial, some of the stuff I'm going to say here, but it has to be said. It has to be said. Now, ever since the Middle East problem kicked off back on October the 7th, there has been a second front that's opened up in the other countries that are involved, especially America and the United Kingdom, which are the governments of which are supporting the Israelis in their actions upon the Palestinians. And so quite naturally, this has provoked a response among the people who are opposed to the government's support of Israel. And there's nothing particularly surprising really about that. That's what happens in a democracy. If the government is committed on one particular point of view where a large number of people disagree, there's going to be people who gather to oppose that. And we who are British constitutionalists, we believe in freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, provided, of course, that it's not inflammatory, providing, of course, that you're not encouraging a crime to be committed, that is to say, you're not inciting, and provided that it's peaceful itself. And whatever you may think about these particular Palestinian marches, and no doubt they do cause hassle to people in the centre of London, mainly, whatever you may think about them, they have been generally peaceful. And there hasn't been any really large kicking off or anything like that. However, the government has been upset about them because it doesn't really like to see, I'm presuming it doesn't like to see its particular point of view contradicted in the public square. And so this is really where we are today. So George Galloway, who's one of the very few people in the country who could be, who's well enough known, and who is also opposed to the government, or rather Parliament's point of view, managed to get himself elected in Rochdale, no doubt with the help of a significant number of the Muslim population in Rochdale. And, well, good for him, basically. That's the way that democracy works. It's not particularly surprising. There's nothing to be concerned about. The idea that this is some sort of terrible thing or some sort of worrying development or anything, all of that's really just clickbait, as they say. It's simply a man with a particular opinion managed to take advantage of the situation and managed to get elected. And that's the way democracy works. That's the way that democracy works. So from our point of view as British constitutionalists, it's just like, well, hey ho, we look forward to seeing what Galloway's got to say, and maybe he'll put his oar in, as they say, in the House of Commons, and he'll be a rare voice for his particular position, because for reasons which often escape us, both Labour and Tory are committed to continuing to support the Israeli position. And you wonder why that might be, but it just happens to be the case. And Britain is quite unique in that, along with the United States, in that the people who actually control the debate are all for that position. So what's the big deal? Why did Rishi Sunak come out and start complaining about George Galloway being elected? It's as if it came across as if he didn't like democracy. It came across as if he only supported democracy if either he or the Labour Party or the Lib Dems won. And if an outsider wins, then he doesn't support democracy anymore. So it came across really like a bad PR for Rishi Sunak, and we monitor the media very carefully, all the social media channels, and there's basically nobody who was coming out and saying, "Oh, Rishi, well done. That was exactly the message that we wanted to hear." I mean, what sort of conservative even is sitting listening to that and going, "Oh yeah, that's we mustn't ensure that third parties can ever get elected. Somebody who's not a member of the major parties gets elected. Oh no, we've got to stop that." There's not anybody in the country really thinking like that. Whatever you may think about George Galloway, and I know he's a Marmite character, you either love him or hate him, and I know that he does a lot of things to annoy people, but he annoys people right across the board. I mean, I read an article just before coming on that was in yesterday's National by one of the Green candidates saying that she would never support a social conservative like Galloway. So from some people's perspective, he's a social conservative. From other people's perspective, he's some sort of, left-wing commie. From other people's perspective, he's some kind of raging Irish nationalist. So really all that says is that different strokes for different folks, And as far as we're concerned, we like George Galloway because he's a unionist. He was one of the most effective voices for the union in 2014, if not the most effective voice for the union. And he's also a Brexiteer. And he loves Britain. In his campaign for Rochdale, he sent out 2 letters. One letter was clearly to the non-Muslim white community, where he actually used those words about how much he loved Britain and how he stood for the Union and how he stood for Brexit and how he, quote, wanted to make Rochdale great again, okay, borrowing a Trumpism. And then in his letter to the Muslims, it was all about how he was going to stand for Gaza. And is that two-faced? I don't think so. I think that's simply just looking at the situation, seeing that Rochdale is made up of these different groups. So how do I, as a politician, appeal to these different groups? And he appealed successfully. And he was able to do what the Labour Party candidate couldn't do, which was come out very strongly for the Palestinians and for Gaza. Because the Labour Party candidate, even though he was a Muslim, was not able to do that, and tried to do it at one point, and then the Labour Party got rid of him. So that's fairly ridiculous. There, as Derek says, George Galloway did a lot in 2014 for the Union. And so what are we to make of Rishi Sunak's position? Well, for me, it seemed that Rishi Sunak was simply annoyed, or at least the people who tell Rishi Sunak what to say, were annoyed that a strong voice against parliamentary policy on the Israel-Gaza conflict had been elected to the parliament, and that we were meant to think that this alternative voice, Galloway's alternative voice, was somehow bad for our democracy. When it's not bad for our democracy, it's good that we have somebody who is not beholden to special interests, is not beholden to any kind of Israel lobby, is not beholden to any Palestinian lobby, but who is beholden to his own point of view. And I think that's very, very important, because most politicians, most MPs are not in that position. They have to do what the party tells them. And if the party says you cannot talk about that particular issue, you cannot take that particular side, then they do have to shut their mouths, or they will be relegated to the backbenches and their career will be over. So it's good that we have somebody like Galloway in power, and really British democracy needs a kick up the backside in that sense. It needs to break away from the party system, and it needs to have voices that are not afraid to even get themselves in trouble. And don't think for a moment that I agree with absolutely everything that comes out of George Galloway's mouth, but I do like the idea of having politicians who can speak their mind without fear or favour. And that's a very, I think, good development. A very good development, an exciting development for British democracy, because what keeps British democracy in the doldrums is the Uniparty, as people are now taken to call it, which means vote Labour or Tory, you get the same thing. So we have to break that Uniparty consensus, that Uniparty domination, and that's very important that we do so. And we see from the press, the legacy press, are very upset that Galloway got in, because they can see how that is breaking the Uniparty consensus, which they depend upon. Because I've come to believe, I used to spend thousands a year on national newspapers. I used to read them all the time, every day. And then when Brexit came along in 2020, I realised that the national newspapers actually had an agenda to keep us in the EU, and they wouldn't accept Brexit. And I realised these national newspapers are not reporting the news, they're actually just promoting an agenda. What is their agenda? And I've come to believe that their agenda is simply to keep the moneyed parties in, for example, the City of London in the style to which they're accustomed, and also to create wars around the world where the consensus looks like it's going to be overthrown. That's the only explanation I can have for some of the editorials that we see in the Times and in the Telegraph and in the other big national newspapers. Anyway, to get back to Rishi Sunak and his definition of extremism and how that refers to all of us. So he said that he, as a consequence of his fear that somehow the British system was moving in a way that he didn't like, he said that the dangers were coming from Islamic extremism and the far right. Well, that's news to me, of course, because I've never heard of any far right really in the United Kingdom at all. In fact, there was a little bit of news last week. In fact, it was the same day, it was the 1st of March. A man had been arrested and sentenced to 2 years in prison for putting up stickers saying things like, "It's okay to be white" and "Love your nation." And stickers which were not against the law. His name was Sam Melia, Melia. He got convicted and was put in jail for 2 years for what exactly? For putting up stickers that the system disapproved of. So that's the only far-right activity, really, if you could even call that far-right, in the United Kingdom and at the present day. There is literally nothing else. And that wasn't even far-right. Unless, of course, you start throwing in people who want to stop immigration, or unless you're going to include Christian groups against abortion, unless you're going to include people who don't want to see trans education in schools. I mean, unless you're going to call these people far right, there is no far right in the United Kingdom whatsoever. But here's the danger. It is very possible that that is exactly what Rishi Sunak was meaning when he said far right. So when he and the Labour Party, which went along with him, when they say things like, "We're going to clamp down on the far right," that's what they're perhaps meaning, is that we're going to clamp down on these socially conservative groups. You know, even I could see even supporting the union could become a far right position, you know, the way that it's going. Why? Because, we want to keep Britain together and Britain's a great nation. Oh, that's far right. Only far right people say Britain's a great nation. You know, that could happen. So when you see them coming in with that sort of nonsense, you've got to think, could work the other way, of course. They could extend it out to the far left as well. The point is, if we believe in the British Constitution, we should not be extending the definition of extremist. We should be focusing it very narrowly on a particular thing that we mean by it. We shouldn't be throwing it out like a wider and wider net to try to catch more and more and more people that we happen to have some kind of political or ideological disagreement with. We should be narrowing it upon particular points of view, and it should really only be those people who incite violence, because that is wrong and that is against the law in a democracy. But beyond that, most things should just be taken with a pinch of salt, and we can agree to disagree on particular points of view that we don't like. But when you start to bring in the law against your political opponents, then that really is moving into a society that's really quite un-British. Anyway, so what is the government's definition of extremist? I looked into this. Now, in his speech, Rishi Sunak said that he was going to double the work that's put into the PREVENT programme. Now, the PREVENT programme is government programme which is to, quote, stop people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. And its objectives are to, quote, tackle the ideological causes of terrorism, intervene early to support people susceptible to radicalisation, and enable people who have already engaged in terrorism to disengage and rehabilitate. So all of that's quite fine. And as I understand it, the PREVENT programme also tries to find individuals at an early age who appear to be getting radicalised, and it's generally, of course, used with the Muslim population, where there may be some young kids getting radicalised, and so it's seeking to identify them at an early age to ensure that they don't go down the wrong path. And to that extent, it's certainly quite an admirable programme. But of course, like all of these sorts of programmes, you can also take that too far as well, and you can start picking on youths who are just going through puberty and are too excitable, if you know what I mean. So, but he's going to redouble efforts into that. And in that PREVENT programme, they have defined extremism as, quote, vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs, close quote. So, I'll say that again. Extremism, as defined by the government in the PREVENT strategy, is, quote, vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. So that is suggesting to us what they are defining fundamental British values as, which is to say democracy, rule of law, liberty, and mutual respect of other people's faiths and beliefs. Fair enough. And in fact, I checked up on this, and I looked at a PDF from the government today on this matter, and I'll just put that particular one up. Fundamental British values. This is what their PDF, their guidance for schools, says about fundamental British values. Schools should promote the fundamental British values of democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. This can help schools to demonstrate how they are meeting the requirements of Section 78 of the Education Act in their provision of SMSC. Well, I was like, what's this SMSC? And for those not in the know, SMSC stands for, quote, spiritual, moral, social, and cultural. Social, moral, spiritual, and cultural. So, actively promoting, it says here, the values means challenging opinions or behaviours in schools that are contrary to fundamental British values. Attempts to promote systems that undermine fundamental British values would be completely at odds with schools' duty to provide this spiritual, moral, social, cultural education. Through their provision of spiritual, moral, social, cultural education, schools should enable students to develop their self-knowledge, self-esteem and self-confidence, enable students to distinguish right from wrong and to respect the civil and criminal law of England, encourage students to accept responsibility for their behaviour, show initiative and to understand how they can contribute positively to the lives of those living and working in the locality, enable students to acquire a broad general knowledge of and respect for public institutions and services in England, it says here, so it may be slightly different in Scotland and elsewhere. Further tolerance and harmony, that is to say further promote tolerance and harmony between different cultural traditions by enabling students to acquire an appreciation of and respect for their own and other cultures, encourage respect for other people, and encourage respect for democracy and support for participation in the democratic processes. including respect for the basis on which the law is made and applied in England. Well, to be quite frank with you, if the schools did all of that, we'd be living in a pretty knowledgeable country where we were all clued up on the British Constitution and our civics and our civic responsibilities and duties. So all of that's all fine and good, and that should all just be taught anyway in schools. And if they did that, the country would be fine. I'm sure there's lots of schools that don't teach any of that. I mean, are they teaching things like where are we? Encourage respect for democracy and support for participation in the democratic processes. I mean, in the past, there used to be a thing called civics where they would teach how the law is made, how the executive differs from the legislature, which differs from the judiciary, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are things that should be taught in schools. I mean, there shouldn't be any question about that. As far as the things like tolerance and so on, that's all important as well, although don't go overboard on all of that, because then that can just get ridiculous. But generally speaking, these are all just things that should be taught in school anyway, without being obsessive about it. But he's going to... So basically, fundamental British values then, as the government defines it, is simply democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. Nothing particularly controversial there at all. If that's basically just constitutional knowledge and agreeing generally with the democratic system as presently constructed within the United Kingdom. So no real argument with any of that. And I believe that definition of fundamental British values was built upon a speech which Theresa May gave when she was Home Secretary to the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors on the 23rd of March 2015. Upon that was constructed that definition of fundamental British values. So the new definition of extremism, however, is going to come in, we're told, next week. And the front page of the Times yesterday said, Tories divided over new definition of extremism. Just read one or 2 points. Trans rights critics and traditional Christians could be caught up in crackdown on Islamism. And the question that I would pose to you is that intentional? In an effort to tackle growing Islamic and far-right extremism, ministers are attempting to update the definition to encompass any group or individual who, quote, promotes an ideology that undermines the rights or freedoms of others. Promotes an ideology that undermines the rights or freedoms of others. So you could see very easily how somebody could complain that a Christian anti-abortionist was undermining their quote-unquote right to, for example, abortion, or how a group that was opposed to sex education in primary schools was undermining somebody's right to teach it, and so on. So it says here, some members of the cabinet fear that the plans will bar groups such as gender-critical feminists from challenging transgender women's access to same-sex facilities, or have an impact on traditional Christian groups that oppose gay marriage or abortion. Michael Gove, the Community Secretary, is expected to present the updated definition next week. Under proposals being considered, the move will ban anyone in Whitehall, government bodies or quangos from engaging with or funding groups or individuals that meet the new definition. It will be non-statutory, so it will not be a criminal offence per se, but will only affect those whom government officials and ministers can engage with, and that includes public bodies as well that are under government control. So the draft definition, which will need to be signed off by the Cabinet, includes 3 strands, according to government sources familiar with the plans. First, it defines extremism as the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on intolerance, hatred, or violence that aims to undermine the rights or freedoms of others. Well, it is very easy for a clever lawyer to claim that somebody's ideology is based on hatred. That's very, very easy to do for a lawyer. So defining extremism as something that's based on quote-unquote hatred is for the birds, quite frankly. It's completely subjective. Second, it includes those who seek to undermine or overturn the British liberal system of democracy and democratic rights. Including those who seek to undermine or overturn the British liberal system of democracy and democratic rights. Well, I don't know anybody that's trying to do that. It will also ban any groups or individuals who intentionally create a permissive environment for either of these points of view from working with government bodies. So listen to this. It is understood that this includes influencers on social media who are not extremists themselves, but deliberately play down the dangers of extremism. Okay, so who's a social influencer on social media? Who has just deliberately played down, or rather, not deliberately, but just naturally and sensibly played down the dangers of George Galloway? Who calls George Galloway an extremist? The Conservatives and Labour. Okay, so such a law could theoretically be used to stop normal people upholding the normal British democratic system. It could be used to stop people like me arguing the point for someone who's just been elected to Parliament. So it's all just dangerous nonsense. When you play with words like that, it's a very un-British thing to do as well. It's like twisting words in order to get your particular point, your particular political point dominant. And we see it all the time happening these days. Somebody says here, it's going to be incredibly difficult, a government source said. You can see how very quickly small c conservative groups will be hit with this. Well, A Force for Good is a small c conservative group. We don't support the Conservative Party or indeed any party, but we're certainly a small c conservative traditionalist group. This person goes on. Some people think that gender critical views are... Oh no, this is Marianne Cates, who's actually quite a sensible Tory MP, which is not saying a whole lot, but she's one of the more sensible of a very small group of them. She says, some people think that gender critical views are quote-unquote extreme. I think decriminalising abortion to birth is extreme. Opposition politicians think the current government is extreme. As if extremist views are illegal, then the person who defines extremism has the power to curtail free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of association. This is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. It goes on, in his speech outside Number 10 on Friday, the Prime Minister said the government would introduce a, quote, new robust framework, quote, unquote, to tackle extremism. Sunak warned that democracy was being targeted and expressed concerns that the regular protests over Gaza had fueled growing levels of Islamic extremism and anti-Semitism in the UK. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Basically, our advice is to Rishi Sunak is don't meddle with these sorts of things, okay? Just hold true to the British traditions of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, and then let the cards fall where they may. And if you're going to insist on a British policy which throws your weight entirely behind Israel, then you're going to get the people who don't support Israel marching on the streets. That's just what happens. That's what happens in a democracy. And provided that they're not doing it in a violent way, and providing that they're not inciting violence, then that's okay. And if somebody is inciting violence, then of course you arrest them and you charge them with the crime of incitement. That's the price you pay for living in a liberal democracy. Don't keep widening the net to try to catch more and more people. The laws are perfectly fine as they exist at the moment. Absolutely. The laws are fine as they exist at the moment. And, well, Eric makes a very good point here. Will they ban farmers, for example? In Wales, they are being labelled as far-right extremists who have absorbed climate change conspiracies due to their ongoing protests. That's right. Many of us don't believe in the climate change notion, and some people will call us extreme for that point of view. And you can say, oh, you want the world to be destroyed because you don't believe in climate change. You want the sun to burn up everybody. You're a murderer because you don't believe in climate change. You know, see how easy it is to play with words. They are trying to control us, basically. Or someone calling for the abolition of halal slaughter could be considered to be extreme as well. That person would be called a far-right extremist, no doubt. Because as Christopher goes on here, says, you're right about narrowing the focus on defining a term like extremist. We should narrow the focus, otherwise it becomes a break on just about all expressions of contrary opinion. That's right. And I suppose governments, maybe in the past, going back, have always sought to limit the voice of their political opponents. I mean, we shouldn't get too tied up in the idea that Britain has had this wonderful free speech past. Going back to the 1600s and the 1700s and so on, you had to be very careful what you said about lots of things, and that's kind of moved on a bit. So governments are always seeking to exclude their opponents in many ways, but in a liberal democracy, we should put our trust in freedom of speech and in freedom of assembly, and we should have laws that prevent incitement to a serious crime, not a petty crime like putting up stickers, but incitement to serious crime is certainly against the law, and it always should be against the law. And any kind of riotous behaviour is also against the law. But otherwise, if you're behaving peacefully and legally in those ways, then it doesn't really matter what size of demonstration you have, as long as you behave within the law. And that's what I would like to hold to as the British view, and the genuine small c conservative traditionalist British view. And I see marches happening in the country that I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't call for them to be banned. I think that's a really intolerant attitude which goes against the true British values, and which can help make our country special. Catherine Rainey asks, Ash, who is our friend, Ash, that Preston journalist, was saying today on his programme how well Conservative and Labour were getting along, the two cheeks of the same backside theory. Do you think that's because they are worried about George Galloway's party or reform? I think they both have reason to be worried about reform, certainly. Reform is going to take votes from the Conservatives, and it's also going to take some votes from Labour, although it will take most votes from the Conservatives. George Galloway's party will take most votes from Labour, undoubtedly. If he manages to get sufficient numbers of people together, he could really throw a spanner in the works, and he could actually ensure that Starmer's landslide, which everybody expects, is not so much a landslide after all. So Labour could be getting attacked from the left with Galloway's party, and the Tories would be getting attacked from the right with Reform. So that's an interesting dynamic which hitherto we have not considered. Good stuff. Now, so the takeaway is, let's not expand the definition of extremist. Simply narrow it. You shouldn't be. You should not be expanding the definition just to catch people on the left or on the right that you don't particularly like. Because think about it this way as well. If the Tories get this into law, then it will be used to attack their opponents. But once Labour come in, they'll use the same law to attack their opponents. So nobody wins from this, whether you're on the left or right. Nobody wins from anti-free speech laws, because they can be applied equally to all, depending upon who happens to be in power at that time. So the best thing is freedom of speech applied fairly, and also freedom of policing applied fairly as well. And I think that's one of the things that some people on our side are very upset about. They see they have a view which in many ways is absolutely correct, that the policing is applied unfairly, that people on the left tend to have a better deal than people on the right. And certainly as far as things like the lockdown protests and so on are concerned, yeah, the government really did clamp down on those people to a very serious extent, in a way that they haven't clamped down on other marches. And some of that is ideological favouritism, but some of it's also just due to the fact that some of these other marches have been very, very big, and there's a limit to what the police can do in such situations at that moment. But you've got to remember, whenever you're out on a march, the police are cameraed up, cameras everywhere. They're holding cameras on sticks, they've got cameras on their chest, they've got cameras on their helmets, and if something kicks off and there's only a few policemen there at the time, they won't do anything, but they've got the video evidence, and the next day you'll get a knock on the door. So believe me, at any march, always be on your best behaviour, because the state will get you. The state is very powerful, and it's for people like ourselves to try to ensure that the state is as fair as possible, and to argue for that fairness. And that requires us to argue always for freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, even if it means we're going to hear stuff and we're going to see stuff that we personally may not approve of. And I think we should always be very cautious about promoting any kind of restriction of freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. Even though it might feel good at the moment to do it, it doesn't work out for us in the long run. The only thing that works out is cleaving to the British Constitution, by which is meant freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, rule of law, democracy, and treating people as you would want to be treated yourself. Folks, it's the top of the hour. Thank you very much. Now, I just want to make a statement here about our wee book, One Big Country. Some of you might not know, but this is our latest publication. It is easily read. It helps to explain where we're coming from as British Unionists and as British Patriots. It's the first volume in a projected 5-volume series, and this is 19 chapters, and it covers about why we love our one big country, understanding devolution, understanding the democratic mandates that the SNP are always talking about, understanding rules for pro-UK politicians, talking about the danger of too much devolution, and talking a bit about what we do as an organisation. And you can get this off Amazon. All you need to do is go to amazon.co.uk and search for One Big Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1. Just put in One Big Country and you'll get that, folks. And we've been going since 2012, and we run our programme here every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. We'll be back next Wednesday and we'll have a guest for half an hour, and we'll probably touch on some of the issues that we touched on this time around as well. And we've also got another book here that you can get actually from our online shop. This is a wee book for the Union, contrasted with a big book for the Union. And a wee book for the Union is at our shop, which is aforceforgood.uk/shop-1. And for those of us who support us monthly, we also have our magazines which we produce, such as this one. This is a 40-page magazine. Our most recent one was on the British monarchy. It was a coronation special, King and Country. And these magazines are available free to anybody who is a monthly donor at our monthly donor programme, which is aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters, which is, there we go, that's the one. You can get you become a monthly donor for like 69 pence a week, which is to say £3 a month, and you can get these magazines free, sent to you free. Otherwise they're around about £4.50 to buy at our shop. And this is a brilliant one. It traces the Scottish roots of the British royal family all the way back to Robert the Bruce. There's the direct line. Fantastic stuff. So we do a lot of work here at A Force for Good, and we speak sense. Oh my, we speak sense. This is where you'll hear the true, what we call authentic unionist voice, the true British patriotic voice. You'll hear it from us. Catherine says, excellent show, you need 2 hours. Absolutely. Well, we're cooking tonight. We're absolutely cooking tonight. Derek says, great show again from the team. Keep up the good work. We certainly will keep up the good work. And what we'll do as well, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and go to all of these. It's simply aforceforgood.uk/UK A Force for Good. And if you're on YouTube, do give us a subscription, because we've been on YouTube since 2013 and we've got nowhere near the numbers of followers that we should have for the content that we put out, for the wisdom that we put out. We've got nowhere near the followers because people don't know about us. So please do try to do what you can to give us some encouragement on that particular matter. Absolutely. We need more shares. That's what we need. Absolutely. We should require all those last things spoken in a democracy. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good, good. Good, good. Yeah. Now, anything I want to say here that has to be said tonight that I haven't said? Yeah, please do go to YouTube, download this program and cut out bits of it that you like and just put it out on YouTube. You know, we'll download this program and we'll put stuff out on YouTube and Twitter and TikTok and so on, but you can do that as well. You know, if you've got the ability to do that, download any of our programs, cut them up, put them out there. We'd love to see that. If there's stuff that we've said tonight that you think is of value, cut it up, put it out there on your own programs, put it out on TikTok, put it out on Twitter, put it out on YouTube. You know, we're happy to see people use our material and put it out there. And that would really help as well. So those of you who have got the ability to do that, please go ahead and do that. We do encourage you to do that. We do encourage you to take our stuff and put it out there. It's the only way this gets out. It's the only way this gets out. So yeah, please do that. And please keep us going in that way. And remember our weapon of mass instruction, which is our book, One Big Country. Go to amazon.co.uk and search for One Big Country. You're going to love this book. It's absolutely amazing. Didn't have time for our competition tonight, folks. So busy doing our talk there that we didn't have time for it. We will, however, see you next week. Thanks for all the people who have come in tonight. And next Wednesday, 7 to 8, or see us on our programs such as TikTok. Here's the TikTok one. TikTok.com/@UK A Force for Good. We're also on BitChute as well. BitChute.com/UK A Force for Good. We've got a backup site on Odyssey.com/@UK A Force for Good. And we're on YouTube at youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. And if you want to simply send us an email, contact@aforceforgood.uk. We love to hear from you. Paul says, I'm always telling people about you. Thank you, Paul. B. White says, that's really awesome, especially with how much pride you take in this show. That's a cool looking photograph of you, Mr. White, if that's you. In fact, B. White is going to be our guest next week. Looking forward to talking to Ben about that. Eric says, good show as always. And Christopher says, thanks for another show. Another great show. Good stuff. Well, it just remains for me to say, folks, thank you for everybody who's watching tonight. We've had a lot of people watching and really pleased with the numbers tonight. Let's make that the same every night. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.